just getting wired up here, and we have an incredibly exciting conversation prepared for you. I think I have some slides back there that maybe we can start off with the first section of slides. I'll do a couple of minutes while everyone's getting wired up, and then I'll introduce the rest of the panelists, and we'll begin our discussion, if that sounds like a good plan. Our topic is something like this: why work looks nothing like work anymore. And the four panelists that you have, myself and my three colleagues, are entrepreneurs. We're entrepreneurs who build companies, and all of us in different stages of company building and of innovation. And the messages that we want to share with you and discuss are about how that works, how that can work, how that will work, and how you can do it in your organizations. Just to get started, I thought I'd share a few facts from the way our business operates. And I think the way our business operates is something quite at the frontier of how even startups are operating right now. And as I told my colleagues, it's quite an extreme system. And this extreme system, I think, will set the table for a much more rooted and rounded conversation. So my business is called Notable. And the news that, for those of you who are in the press today, is that this product is beta today. We've been working on it for the last year and a half, and it's a product that lets teams work together. And what I want to share with you is how we made this thing and why we made this thing in just a couple of minutes, and give you an idea of how certain startups around the world are beginning to work. What Notable is about is working in teams, but without FaceTime and without meetings. It's an idea that you can put people together and ideas in discussion in one place online, where your social relationships are on Facebook and many of your business relationships are in LinkedIn. Maybe the actual conversations and the work of your team is increasingly something happening in software. At Notable, we've built that product, but we've also built Note, a publishing platform that in 6 weeks has crossed a million monthly unique readers, where we're publishing hacks about productivity and how to get things done. We've built a web application, an iPhone app, an Android app. And the way we've done it is using a philosophy called code as cards, not something called code as craft. Code as craft is a term that yesterday I was talking with Chad Dickerson from Etsy, I think can take responsibility for having coined. A very old school and intense group of geniuses with beards and bicycles and free lunches making software. We do something radically different. What we do is we just write cards. And here's a tool called Trello. We just write tiny little cards, long cards, about every single possible feature or color or product element that we might ever want. I write these. And they move slowly across the page as people do the work. These are the people who do the work. 90% of them I've never seen, I've never Skyped, I've never spoken to, I haven't even ever had a chat with. We've only discussed it on those cards. These are people that we've hired as freelancers, as alumni of my past companies, as referrals that come from the people who work for us. Some of them work full-time and have shares. Some of them work part-time for 10 or 20 hours a week. They work in 12 different time zones. This is their work. This is the only way I know that things are happening. They commit to GitHub. And I watch GitHub. I see commits come in, 15,000 commits in the last 12 months. And this is how I manage my most senior people, with notepads that are in Notable. We write the work that we need to work on, we ask questions, we discuss, we revise, we put notes, we put thoughts, and we change the discussion as it goes over time. I haven't seen these guys in months. I have 3 of them in my office in New York. We rented 25,000 square feet. It's a bit more room than we really need, and we've ended up with 200 people from 30 other startups working next to us. And so now we're running a giant co-working facility because we just don't need an office. And so today we're launching. The beta is live. It's an iPhone app, an Android app, and that's our news. So that's a tiny fragment, just one little insight into the way that one very unusual company is working. We've booked $1 million in revenue. We've gone live with our production top enterprise customer to a dozen universities in the US. And now today we're making it available for regular end users. So this is one way an innovative company is working. So now I offer for you my esteemed and very erudite colleagues, which should be mic'd up by now. I'll introduce them. So thank you for joining me. I was so impressed to spend some time with these guys over the last day and go into some depth about their backgrounds. We have B.Verhart, who is the creator and the co-founder and a leader of Think, which is the school for creative leadership. Also the founder of many social enterprises and media startups over the years, including an impressive conference called Picnic. A.Goldstein, who's the co-founder and leader of Deloitte Digital, and formerly the creator of many startup accelerators and software companies. And we have S.Ismail from Singularity University, where he's a leader of the organization, but also has been the founder of several startups, one that was sold to Google in 2010, and also led the innovation group at Yahoo. And so now I have some questions for you guys, and bringing in the perspectives that you guys can share. And I thought that each of you would have a chance to go through a few thoughts that you had prepared, and I thought we might begin with Boz. And the question is, what are the resources needed, what are the skills and capacities needed for the modern leader of a creative organization?
Yeah. Do we have the...
And you should have his materials.
Yeah. So I think one is, if there is this research that was done amongst 1,500 CEOs in 2011 about the biggest challenges of these CEOs for the coming decade and what skill was lacking. And it was one of the first times that creative leadership was actually mentioned. So I'm talking about Fortune 500 CEOs. And I think if you look at that, and I think there are, of course, always the obvious examples that we take, the creative leaders that have inspired many, the ones that come here and the ones that we read about. But if you look at it, that they have very specific skills. So I think, first of all, they often very much act from passion and purpose. This is a topic that was addressed today. They start with what they really, really, really like. And of course, when you have a group of people like yourselves here, you get a lot of opportunities. So it takes discipline to choose what you really, really, really like. So I think that's one, and to also serve something that's bigger than yourself. I think another competence is like, do you have an explorative mindset? We basically come to these kind of conferences to really feed the mind. And before anything, before you want to think about how we can rethink work in the future, you need to, everything starts with a thought or an idea. So do you have an explorative mind? Then a third one is that, do you envision a better future? So do you really spend time on visioning for the future? And I think there's an interesting, our organization works a lot with McKinsey. Actually, my co-founder, Menno van Dijk, used to be with McKinsey for 22 years. And there is this model about horizons. And I think if you talk about executives, it's really the challenge about how much time do you spend on the third horizon. I spend at least a day a week on the next decade. And it's not because out of luxury, it's because out of discipline, because I want to understand what the future will bring us. I want to step into the future. And that's why I'm trying to sell to my two daughters as well. They're like, forget about it, we want to watch Nickelodeon. They're 7 and 11, so a bit young. But envisioning a better future. So what kind of possible future do you see? What do you want to make happen, etc.? Then I think a fourth one is around orchestrating creative teams. And I'm not talking about management teams, because people often make the mistake, especially a lot of corporates, that once there is a new opportunity you want to set up, they form a management team. And not always, consisting of people that have run the most successfuls in the past. But I'm really talking about a creation team. So often with, a technologist, a designer, somebody that can build something from scratch. And orchestrating a creative team is something that is totally different than compared to, for instance, what we've learned at a business school, where it's orchestrating maybe energy around the management team. And then I think finally, do you train the capability of driving through, right? Whatever it takes. I mean, today there was a lot of talk about entrepreneurship, and it's not easy. We all ask ourselves the question, why do we do this? I mean, it comes with a lot of pain. But whether it's A or B, left or right, you need to train the ability to drive through. So a couple of years ago, we came together, former McKinsey director, creative guy like me.
Former rock and roller, I should say.
I enjoy playing music. Really a mix-up of sort of Harvard meets McKinsey meets Monty Python Flying Circus. And we basically created the school and the executive program we would want to go to. So we got now 240 leaders from all over the world, from 40 countries, and they are also contributing to building this school into something international. And I think that the inspiring thing about it is that, first of all, we look at innovators and creative leaders, and they inspire us, and we look for clues what we can learn. I think a second, but we can't reach them. If you read a biography of somebody that's not there anymore, you can't reach them. Secondly is, what can you learn from fellow creative leaders? So in the group here, spend some time just with your next door, the person sitting next to you, and just share some thoughts around how do you see this future evolving. And then thirdly, look back inside. I think, you've all been successful in the past. What made you successful in the past, and how can you take that as a medicine for the future?
That is awesome. That is awesome advice. Baz, before we started, threatened to use the old Metallica trick of locking all the doors and playing for 3 hours, which I think we would all really enjoy.
We can do that if you want.
But as we push the conversation forward, maybe I'll ask Andy to enlighten us a little bit with the approach that he's developed on helping organizations become creative and innovative company builders, not mere, buyers, acquirers, bolt-on, the old bad way. So tell us a little bit about your thinking and your practice.
Yeah, so I've been with Deloitte now for a whole 4 months. And before that, I was building the Entrepreneurship Center at the LMU. We've had about 127 digital companies come out of there. And then built an accelerator for the German government called the German Accelerator. And then industry started coming and saying, Allianz Digital Accelerator, how can we get into this business, Volkswagen Data Lab? And that's why we went to digital, Deloitte Digital with my 2 partners, basically because what we are seeing is that the leaders today, essentially, we would say that corporate venture capital and corporate M&A is basically broken. So essentially what's happening is companies are going out, they're paying tens, hundreds, and maybe even more of millions of euros to buy a company, and they're buying a square peg. And they know at the end they have a round hole, and they believe along the way that they can round the edges and they can get out the hole. And the problem is, in the digital age, we don't have that time. And the other thing is that M&A deals, and we know the statistics, is 60 to 70% failure rate. If any other part of the organization was failing at that rate, everyone who was running it would be fired. And so what we're saying is, why don't you build the organization that you need? Why don't you build the digital business? And what we do is we go out to entrepreneurs. We go out into the ecosystem. That's what the leaders today have to learn, that they can't do everything by themselves. They have to go out. We find entrepreneurs. We build the company, actually build it, operate it, and then transfer it back to the corporation so that they have an entity they can decide along the way, does it fit in with what I'm doing? Does it need to be outside? And that's why even Deloitte Digital, we've structured it as a separate entity so that we have access to 18 digital studios around the world, all of the global offices, but we're able to move very quickly. And I think the big question for leaders today is, this is something that has to happen from the top. So in other words, I can't say I'm building a new business and then delegate that down to the bottom if I haven't created a structure inside the corporation or around the corporation where innovation can live. And innovation is simply not going to live in the future the way it has lived in the past.
So do you rent out a big warehouse across the street from headquarters, some hip brick-lined building, and bring all your own geniuses in to start building? What does it look like when you do this?
No, what it really looks like is it looks like coming up with a clear business that you know you ought to be in. Yeah, it looks like then not saying what do we have inside already, but saying where are the entrepreneurs? Does this exist? How do I bring this in? Should I actually create a separate accelerator program where a lot of these companies can come in? But it doesn't necessarily look like writing a big business plan, taking a long time, thinking about it, going through all the corporate maneuverings. It looks like I need this business, therefore I build it. I may or may not have the capacity inside my company, but I want to have that because Zalando was built in 4 years as a €1 billion company and is now a market cap we all know about.
It's massive. So you have to transform yourself or find it inside you in listening to Baz. You have to transform your organization almost from whole new cloth, it sounds like, in listening to Andy. And the book that you've just written, Salim, I think is the product of extensive research on what you call exponential organizations. And I think you do have some slides. Hopefully we actually have them on the screen. And what we were hoping to hear from you is, what is the architecture of an exponential organization? What is it?
So how many of you are familiar with Singularity University? I see a show of hands. Most of you? OK. So we bring together the world's leading experts in very fast-moving technologies. And over the last few years, the background before this, as Bas mentioned, I was running Yahoo's incubator. And I found that when you try and do disruptive innovation inside a big company, the immune system of the organization will come and attack you. Right? And I hear some chuckles from the audience, guys, people who've been through the process. And so essentially, all of our organization structures are built to withstand change and withstand risk. And yet what we're seeing today is that disruptive change is the higher order bit. And the question is, how do you deal with that? And literally over the last 5 years, we've seen a new breed of organization structure that unlike anything we've ever built before. And one way to think about this is all of the businesses that we've ever built before do operate in a particular way. You get an asset or a workforce, you put a legal boundary around it, and you sell access to that scarcity. That's essentially how we've been building businesses for several hundred years. In the last 5 years, we've hit an inflection point, and rather than trying to own everything and own our assets and own our workforce, we're turning it inside out. Airbnb does not own its own hotel rooms, Uber does not own its own cars, and so on. And so literally what these new organizations are learning how to do is tap onto the outside and tap into what's going on around them. We've identified kind of 10 attributes like leveraging community and crowd, leveraging algorithms, leveraging engagement and gamification. We found that if you implement 4 out of these 10 attributes, you get a 10 times performance improvement compared to the peers in your own space. So if you're familiar with the CPG industry, a really good product in the retail world goes from new idea to a Walmart shelf in about 300 days. Quirky, which is an exponential organization, does that same process, new idea, to a Walmart shelf in 29 days. Right? And this is unheard of in a really old industry. And we're seeing this radical now transformation where these companies are turning themselves inside out. So the book is, half of it is what are these things and what are the characteristics. The second half of the book is how do you do it? How do you apply this to a startup or a mid-market company? But mostly, how do you retrofit these ideas into a large organization? David Rose, one of our faculty, made this comment that any organization built for success in the 20th century is doomed to failure in the 21st century. And so we're seeing this entirely new. We're currently tracking about 100 or 150 such organizations. In a couple of weeks, we'll announce the top 50 most scalable organizations that we've ever seen. And what are the mechanisms and metrics that have them scale so fast?
So Salim, tell us some of the how-to.
One last piece. The fundamental idea that's emerged from this around these new organisms is when you're running a business, you're worried about managing cost of supply and cost of demand, right? And you optimize around both. What the internet did for the first time, it helped us drop the cost of demand exponentially. Online marketing, referral marketing, and if you get a viral loop, it goes straight to zero. What these new organizations have figured out how to do is how do you drop the cost of supply exponentially? If you're Uber, the marginal cost to add a new car is almost zero. Same with Airbnb. If you use Waze, when they get a new user, it hits supply and demand. And so this is the reason these market caps are exploding, is they have no cost of supply and no cost of demand.
They're having some problems with their slides. So I wanted to ask you if you could give us some more of the nuts and bolts, right? You know, it's easy and exciting for startups to look at someone like Uber and make the moves they're making in a way that feels native, to say, we're going to crowdsource our supply and aggregate demand, and no. What is some of the how-to for a big organization to use that learning? You know, Novartis and Basel, can they do what? Yeah,
so actually maybe the most interesting company in the world is doing this the best is Apple. I would argue that Apple, which is basically a design capability with a supply chain bolted underneath, that's not the real innovation. What Apple has figured out how to do is take its core capabilities, you take a disruptive team, you take them to the edge of the organization, keep it completely stealth, and say, go knock off another industry. If you build an incubator to build products and supplies or services for the existing company, you evoke the immune system problem, right? And so Apple does this better than anybody. They just get a team, go to the edge and go watches, payments, music, iPhones, tablets, et cetera, and they can keep going. And the incumbent businesses need to figure out how to do this. So existing corporations need to figure out how to navigate this. And we think we've cracked the code on how to do that.
Yeah, and tell us, Andy. I mean, you must confront this problem, right?
Yeah, this topic about the immune system, it does actually kick in. And the first thing that you have to do is you have to get it set up so that people are open to something completely new. If they're not open for something new, then nothing is going to be able to enter. And when you that'll come bottom up. But to come back to the leadership topic, if it's not dictated, or not dictated, if it's not espoused from the top down, if there's not an openness for it, if you take a large organization and you say to them, we ought to be working with the young startups, when you start that conversation, the idea is absurd, but a year after you start that conversation, everybody is talking about it. And so it's happening very fast. And people need to embrace that much faster than it's happening today.
Yeah, I mean, a year later, like in my world, so I'm still an entrepreneur, I'm stuck starting companies, and I have no money, and I'm trying to launch stuff and get customers, and you guys are beyond that. But in my endeavors, starting a conversation that gets rolling for a year is laughable. How is that a way to change an organization?
But that's still reality.
Is that really what change is?
It's still reality. And you're not. There's one thing in the corporation that you're never going to change, digital or not. You're never going to change the budget year. The budget year is the holy cow, and the company is going to go through their financial processes, and if you don't have a way for them to interact in the budget process along the way with new ideas, then they won't change.
So I wanted to get us to tackle a couple of other vectors which are extremely modern problems. I think a big chunk of this conference this year actually is about the way work is changing. What is the future of how we make things? What are these organizations? How will they look? How will they operate? And folks have been giving talks the last couple of days. The wartime CEO, peacetime CEO theme that Ben Horowitz introduced yesterday is very connected to the dictator and change maker question that we're raising. There are some other themes that are in the air, and they're quite fascinating. One actually wasn't articulated here at the conference, but a few days ago, Paul Graham, who seems to be very often even ahead of Silicon Valley in pointing out trends in culture for hackers and for makers, wrote a post that said, what doesn't seem like work, do that. And I guess he means do what you love. Maybe that's just an old idea. What doesn't seem like work? Do people in some of these organizations do things that feel like work? Can they do things that don't seem like work? Is it even a practical piece of advice for a large organization to transform by confronting this very millennial YOLO kind of feeling about not having a purpose, just doing what's fun?
Well, I think we're in this age where most people, certainly most people in this room, choose what they want to do, right? And so something we noticed in the book and researching all these organizations, they all have what we call a massive transformative purpose, a BHAG, if you like, with a social mission to it. They're all out to transform the world. And we are, if you're not doing that, if you look at the statistics, something like 71% of people are dissatisfied with their corporate job. And so we think we're going to see a very radical shift in how we operate those. We think the age of the big corporation is going to start to die off. In every industry where there's 8 big players, we think that'll shrink down to 2. And there'll be platforms serving little ecosystems of startups. And we're seeing that in the music business. We've seen that in the book business. And we'll see that in most businesses, certainly as they get information enabled. And that's the trigger point that we see is most of these, you can do this new way of working when you have an information-based environment.
Can a big organization, a Goliath, be a bag of startups? Can it be a giant co-working space? We were talking a little bit about some examples of companies that you thought, Baz, might be champions of that idea, that they can.
Yeah, I think it's often organizations where you have a founder CEO. So like in family companies, like they really drive it forward. They are sometimes organized as a bunch of startups. I think very fundamental for any organization is like, first of all, how do you create a home for people? So you told me that you have a big space. Now all kinds of startups coming to you. Apparently you have something, you've created something, right? So what is for the thinkers and the innovators and et cetera in your organization, what kind of space can you create? And the other thing is, and it was also addressed by Adriana Huffington, is like, how do you manage energy? I mean, who's had a great conference call lately where you say, the principle of a conference call gives me energy in this room? Yeah, so there you go. So I think in technology, there's a huge opportunity in the future of work, how you can come up with apps that give energy. So for instance, a good friend of mine, Philip Rosedale, is working on high fidelity, which is basically a virtual world. Again, he's the founder of Second Life. But it's a virtual world where you have eye contact. And apparently, with your avatar. So apparently when you speak to somebody, where you have eye contact, it already adds, in a virtual way, to energy. Although we like this stuff more than anything.
Yeah, we are occasionally with other human beings in our work, I guess. It does still happen. One of the themes that's, I think, very much on everyone's mind is the rise of the robots. And I think there was a really good comment Stuart Butterfield from Slack made in his talk that, or actually maybe it was last night over beers, he said 66% of the messages in his company's Slack stream are produced by robots. They're commits to GitHub or updates from some status service. So he runs a company where 2/3 of the communication in the principal and singular location of their communication is produced by robots. I wonder what you guys think about a workplace that is mediated by software where the endpoints are robots. Is it a fantasy? I mean,
it's coming, and frankly, we're there now. I mean, if you look at anybody with a smartphone, they're not much more than a robot. They're processing information, looking at it, then outputting it again. That trend is just going to continue. We've made a prediction at SU that within about 10 years, we will not need human beings for any manual labor anywhere in the world. This is quite a profound thing. If you look at, even today, using machine learning algorithms, you could replace 47% of white-collar jobs in the US today. And so this is going to happen. It's just simply a question of time. That has a pretty big implication for jobs. But that's not what this topic is about.
But you know, I remember somebody telling me 20 years ago that the internet was going to wipe out all trade shows because everything was going to be virtual. And I think it's not going to happen to the extent that we're thinking. I think that people need to come together. They're going to continue to come together. They're going to have more tools. And that the large organizations need to open up. They need to open up their rule system. And what you find is that there's a lot of young companies, people who today say, this is what I want to do with my life, are not necessarily going to say, I'm going to do it according to your rules. And so there's a bottom-up that's happening. But let's not forget that the corporations that are going to be successful are the ones that realize we have the massive amounts of consumer data in our hands. We are serving those people. Let's figure out how to serve those people the way we want to serve they want to be served, and at the same time, therefore, find the people in their organization who also want to work in a different way.
You know, it's a cool hack on DLD that some people mention in the main coffee room, that you go to DLD, but you don't go to any of the talks. You have all your best conversations over coffee or over beers or in another room. So it's amazing to see all you guys here, and it's a big compliment, I think, to my fellow panelists here. But in some ways, that is also the changing structure of our work environment. I mean, and Boz makes a joke that meetings are boring. Meetings suck. I mean, if I could cancel every meeting, I already did it in my company. If I could cancel all your meetings, you'd be incredibly grateful, I hope. And in some ways, it hasn't happened because the tools haven't been invented. When I tell people they should cancel all their meetings often, the reaction I hear is, oh, impossible. What would we replace them with? And to me, that sounds like a problem looking for a solution, not like an unchanging, permanent fact about human work. I mean, so much of our social, political, and other relations are now happening online. Those dimensions of work can be done through technology. Just my pitch for the robots.
I think we've hit there's a really fundamental inflection point that we're hitting in the world where the amount of radical innovation is about to completely explode. Right? If you went back 10 years ago, we had about 500 million connected devices on the internet. Today, we're up to about 9 billion. By the end of the decade, it'll be 50 billion, and about a decade after that, we're going to get to 1 trillion internet-connected devices. So just on that statistic, from 9 billion to 1 trillion, we're about 1% of the way there. This is why this is a great title for this conference, right? It's just the beginning. It means that every single mechanism by which we do our work today will fundamentally transform. And it lifts us straight up to the leadership question.
Yeah.
Every single mechanism by which we run the world today, our civics, our politics, our legal systems, healthcare, religion, education, you name it, all designed for a world a few hundred years ago. Not for the world, definitely not for the trillion sensors. But we're
well, those are jobs the robots won't take. And so we can be grateful to Ismail for pointing out that, Salim, for that there is such a huge array of jobs that are left for us human beings to do.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely just the beginning. That said, our time is just finished. So please join me in thanking my fellow panelists.
Thank you.
It's hard to see.